Bill Holiday here. The podcast is called Beyond the Classroom, and the producer here for all of these is Reggie Martell. He's off to my right. And we've got Gary Shaw and Brian Edwards with us today. Gary is a time-honored researcher in the John F. Kennedy assassination case. He goes back decades, literally almost to the beginning. Gary, you are a legendary figure to the point where if your name is affiliated with something that comes up relative to research in the John F. Kennedy assassination case, it gets instant credibility because of you. So congratulations on that.
Thank you for that.
And Brian, probably you don't remember this or me, but we met approximately 25 years ago at JFK Lancer through Deborah Conway. And you have come up through the ranks, I would say. Compared to Gary, you're a newbie, although I'm going to give you in the vicinity, you can correct me if I'm wrong, of about 25 years or so of research in this case. And you, along with another of your cohorts, Casey Quinlan, produced a book, Behind the Fence Line, something to that extent. And that's with the Ed Hoffman case and Ed Hoffman's ability to have seen from the Stemmons Freeway what was going on in the parking lot atop the grassy knoll at the vortex of the picket fence on top of the grassy knoll. And but anyway, so let's start by, how did you guys find each other and how did you find common ground on this particular topic that you've put together a new book on?
I can speak to that, I guess, probably as well as Brian. I was at a conference in Dallas, one of the Debbie Conway's conferences, and I hadn't been around in years and years, but I listened to Brian give a presentation on his Hoffman book and what he learned from Ed Hoffman, and he did such a great job. I had already decided that I wanted to continue to write a book on the Ricky White story, the Roscoe White affair, and I approached him that day, I guess, and asked him if he would participate with me. He's a real detailed man. Couldn't have done this book without him, that's for sure. And we began to work together. He trusted me, and I trusted him, and we went after it.
Well,
Everybody
Bill,
trusts you,
and I'm
Gary.
talk-
Go ahead, Brian.
in addition to that, like you were saying, when Gary Shaw asks you to do something, you don't say no. You just say, "What do you want me to do?"
And I appreciate the honor. Yeah,
That's right. That's exactly right. I had seen, it was, I think, the following year after they gave their press conference, the Ricky White press conference at the JFK Center. Larry Howard approached me kind of clandestinely and asked me if I'd be interested in attending a midnight film showing over at the center. And I said, well, yeah, of course, I would love to see that. And so my wife and Casey and I went over to the center at midnight, and this little theater, about 35 people. And Larry showed us some home movies that he had shot of his trip to Gary, I'm having trouble.
Van
Horn, and of what he found out there in the desert, and the little cabin and the shell casings and the radio antenna and the radio equipment. And so the story was that Roscoe White, a former Dallas police officer, was directly involved in the assassination. And from my law enforcement experience, I was a police officer at the time, and I thought, well, what a great cover that would have been. Nobody would ever question what he was doing. And so I thought, well, that's a great story. I just wish I knew more. And then when Gary approached me, asked me if I'd be interested in helping, I said, of course. And one of the caveats was, I said, well, of course I'll help, but I want to see your files. And he let me. Gary Shaw doesn't give files out to anybody, but he let me take 3 Tupperware, or the biggest Rubbermaid tubs full of manila folders, and I copied every one of them. And we produced this book out of the selected sections of Gary's original research.
Let me back up just a little bit and stay with you, Brian. I got my wife, of all people, to view the Oliver Stone JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass
Yeah.
piece, and you're one of the people that he consulted on the chain
Right.
of custody, particularly. And as soon as my wife saw you on the television, she said, "That's the guy you're talking to? You're
Yeah.
on TV. You got it."
My 15 seconds of enlightenment, I guess it were.
Well,
He
That was
did
the,
how did that happen? How did?
well, Jim D'Ingenio called me one out of the blue and asked me if I was busy and if I could take a call from a person in California. He didn't tell me who it was. I said, sure. And a few minutes later, the phone rang and it came up on my cell phone as Los Angeles. Well, I don't know anybody in Los Angeles. I don't know anybody in California. And as soon as he asked me if I was Brian, I go, that's Oliver Stone. I immediately recognized his voice. And it was a quick conversation. He just asked me, that he said that Jim D'Ingenio is producing the JFK Revisited and asked me if I'd be interested in helping. And that took about, a millisecond. I'm thinking, okay, Gary Shaw has asked me to help him, and now Oliver Stone has asked me to participate. I better say yes to everybody. So anyway, Oliver Stone flew my wife and I to Washington, D.C. for a week, and we sat in front of the camera for about 2.5 hours. And then a month later, they were updating, just doing some more work before they released the video, and flew me out to Los Angeles for 4 days, and we did some more filming out there. So I was pretty excited to be involved with Oliver Stone. And then when I saw the final cut, I thought, that it's funny that at least I've got something on film with Oliver Stone, rather than, it all ended up on the cutting room floor. But that was an experience I'll never forget. That's for sure.
Well, with this particular book, Admitted Assassin, that Brian and I worked on, it came to me. I didn't go looking for this. We had opened a JFK Assassination Information Center in Dallas. This was around 1989 or so. And we got a little publicity. And about that time, Ricky White, whose father was a Dallas police officer in 1963, showed up at our doorstep with a story. And that's the story that I began to follow. It's a convoluted, long, drawn-out affair, and we pursued this for at least 2 years, and then I kind of put it back on the back burner. Didn't do anything. This was about like 1990, 91, 92, along in that time, and I kept researching it and finding out what I could about it. But the story is a fascinating one, a mysterious one, and that's what I began to work on. And myself and 4 other fellas all worked on it. Larry Harris, attorney Bud Finsterwald, and a investigator, PI out of Houston named Joe West. Those fellas, all 4 of them, died within 5 or 6 years of our starting in on this investigation. And so I put it aside for many years. And in fact, it wasn't until, 5, 6 years ago, wasn't it, Brian?
Yeah.
That you and I began to work together on it. And that's how it happened. It's a great story. And the boy that came to us told us absolute truth about it. And the artifacts that he brought forward were real, very real. And that's how this all began. I basically work on documentation, who's telling the story, where did the document come from, how reliable is the person who wrote the document, those things. And some of them are just a call. You have to trust, your sources. And that's basically how I've approached it. I don't listen to all the nuts out there. In fact, you won't find me defending myself to any of them, because it's a waste of time. You're not going to convince them of anything, and they're certainly not about to convince me of anything. I've done my homework for 60-something years, and will continue to do so. Warren Commission was the biggest piece of disinformation America has ever seen.
There's a title right there for this session.
As a follow-up, Bill, I don't know if you know my background, but I was a police officer for 22 years here in the city of Lawrence, Kansas. Go Jayhawks! But I've been to 3 interview schools and 1 advanced interrogation school, and in the first 5 minutes, I can pretty much tell if a person's telling me the truth or not. I mean, there's non-cues. There's cues to watch for. Non-verbal cues to watch for. But the 2 people that I've interviewed, well, I've interviewed a lot of people, not as many as Gary, but I've interviewed a lot of people. But as far as the Ricky White story goes, the first 10 minutes of beating that young man, I knew he was telling the truth. There was no reason for him to lie. He didn't show any kind of deception. He's just telling it, like it was, and this is what he had. And so that's why he went to Gary and said, I need help. I don't know what to do with this material that my dad left us. But he's telling the truth. There's no way he could have made this all up. And Gary, was it Earl Goals who said, I don't know, he quote that Earl Goals wrote and said, I don't know what happened in Dealey Plaza, but I can tell you that if Ricky White made this up, he could no more make up the story of his father than he could explain the origin of the universe. And he's not saying that Ricky's not smart. He's just saying it's too complicated for somebody to sit down and try to figure out how to put this together so that it looks plausible. Ricky's telling the truth. There's no doubt in my mind about it. And I'm sure Gary feels that same way. He wouldn't have put his name on the book. But
well, that was Gary Cartwright, not Earl Gold. Yeah, with Texas Monthly and quite a prolific, well-known author back in those days. And
I'm still interested in logistics, and you were pretty vague, Gary. So we'll give Brian a crack here. Brian, when Gary came to you and asked you to help, what did he ask you to do specifically, and how specifically did you dig in to your task?
Well, first of all, Gary came up with the outline of what we wanted to cover, what the book wanted to cover. Like I said, he's got hundreds of manila folders, and we could have made the book that thick, but nobody's going to read that much. So we just decided, or Gary decided, here's what I want to cover. And this is the best way to tell the story. It's simple for somebody that doesn't know anything about the Roscoe White story. So we basically filtered out all the minutia that wouldn't, would just complicate the story. So we made it as simple as possible. And the book is what, Gary, 300 some pages?
340 pages, I believe.
Yeah. And so we basically shrunk it down into a manageable context so people could read. And that's why we put timelines in the book. So it's like the summary of Roscoe White's story. We gave it a summary in a timeline format. So that was a big space saver.
In lieu of Reggie's question, yeah, go ahead, Gary. Yeah.
Here's the book, and you can see it's, not that thick, but it's full of information that easy to follow, easy to read, and it's a mysterious story, but it's what would I say? I believe it's a key to the assassination. That's the gist of it. And here's a man who confessed in writing to being a participant and firing the fatal headshot, as far as that goes.
But somebody who and I don't know if this person exists, but could somebody who doesn't know anything at all about the Kennedy assassination pick up that book and be given enough of a background to be able to understand and appreciate the story?
I think so. And the people who have read it that are not familiar with all the aspects of the assassination, the grassy knoll, Dealey Plaza, you don't have to know everything about that to understand this book. And I think that's what we tried to do. I didn't want to write another book for critics. You understand what I mean? I mean, there's
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, there's hundreds of books that are written that only a critic can understand and appreciate. And I wanted one that anybody could pick up and read and understand and possibly be moved by it.
So what was the story that Ricky came to you with and got your attention?
Okay, he had rediscovered his father's military footlocker. Roscoe White, his father, was in the Marine Corps. He actually went across into the Far East on the same ship as Lee Harvey Oswald. And they were stationed for many days in the same location over in the Far East. And in this footlocker of his daddy's was all types of material. Brian, do you have that picture of Roscoe and Geneva and Jack Ruby and all of that you can put on the screen?
Yes.
And basically the story is this: Roscoe White was in the Marine Corps and served for 4 years plus, and then came back. And in October of 1963, his daddy Roscoe went to work for the Dallas Police Department. That's the same month that Lee Harvey Oswald went to work at the Texas School Book Depository.
Gary, can I interrupt you? Let me interrupt. Bill, you've got the share screen tab turned off. I was going to show you some pictures as Gary's telling the story.
The top left-hand corner, Bill, is Roscoe White looking down the barrel of a rifle at you. Okay, that was taken during his Marine Corps career. The top right one is Jack Ruby oogling Geneva White, his wife. She went to work for Jack Ruby in September of 1963. They were palsy-walsy, I guess you'd call it at that time. And of course, the bottom left-hand corner is Lee Harvey Oswald with the famous backyard photograph. And then on the bottom right is Roscoe White in Dallas police uniform. And could you put together a better scenario than that? The Oswald, we know from eyewitnesses, that Oswald and Ruby were companions during that period of time, and Roscoe and Oswald were also companions at that time. And then here comes Geneva White, who works for Jack Ruby during that time, and it's it's just a little. It can't be coincidence.
Too much for a coincidence. Did she work at the Carousel Club?
Yes, she did. She was cigarette girl or hostess, whatever you wanted. She was not a stripper, but she was a very, very attractive lady, as you can see in that photograph. Mm-hmm. So that's the scenario that we were dealt when Ricky came to us the first time and told us the story. And basically, in that footlocker was a diary, a journal that his father had kept from the time he got out of high school, basically. Maybe earlier, we don't know, because the diary disappeared, all the way through until the time of his death. He died in a tragic explosive accident in September of 1971. But this is what was in the foot locker. You can see in his work at the Dallas Police Department, he handled the photography portion of it. And there you can see a lot of the evidence photographs that the Dallas Police Department had. What's missing from there is a picture of the diary, because by the time we took this picture, the diary had been confiscated. I can't think of a better word, by the FBI. Stolen would be a better term, probably.
Probably with Beverly Oliver's film.
It probably is.
Gary, not Gary, but Brian, while Gary is talking about this, maybe you could point out with your cursor, there are famous photos among the array there. There's J.D. Tippit right in the center, the police officer that was shot, and that was Lee Oswald was blamed for that. Oswald's arrest photograph. You've got also Jack Ruby's there. Can we see your cursor at this point?
Can you?
I guess not. Oh, there it is. Yeah, it's maybe that's mine. Oh, that's mine. I can point it out right here. Oh, there's yours. Go ahead. Good.
Yeah, that's Officer Tippit in civilian clothes. Not sure when that was taken. This is a picture of Oswald's mugshot, his arrest on the 22nd. And then Jack Ruby's arrest photo.
Let me ask you, at just below that and slightly to the left at the bottom, is that an identification card that Oswald had on him?
This one here?
No, to the right further. Now straight
here?
down.
Yeah, this was some of the documents found in the wallet at the Tippit scene. There's a picture of Oswald, supposedly of Oswald in Marine uniform, an infant child. We don't know who the infant child is. And then this is a Social Security. I think this was a. Go ahead, Gary.
Wasn't that a military card?
I think one of these is a military card, and then the other one is Fair Play for Cuba Committee membership card. I think that's what these two things are here. And these are letters from home that Roscoe had sent and to and from home while he was in the service. And then up here is a Roscoe's wooden swagger stick. It had a sergeant's insignia on the cap of it, and then his name was painted on the stick, along with all of the Far East locations that Roscoe visited. And then this is the backyard. This is the famous backyard picture that we've all seen. An actual print of it, but then this one was one that had not been seen by the general public or the HSCA that was in his possession. And that's, I think, one of the key motivating factors to have the HSCA investigators visit Geneva to find out about this picture. Nobody had ever seen this picture before. So how did he end up with it? We don't know.
And it was the only one of the backyard photographs that was made from the original negative. The original negative had disappeared, but this one was from the original negative. The rest of them were not.
One more quick aside, and then first let me apologize, Gary, for knocking you off your track here. I know that people would probably be familiar with that picture of J.D. Tippit and Oswald and Jack Ruby, so they could have a greater understanding. I didn't mean for Brian to have to go through so many photographs either, but when I was putting my book together, I actually found the photographer who took that backyard photograph, a backyard photograph of somebody else dressed with the same weapons as Lee Harvey Oswald in the same spot at 214 Neely Street. I had to pay him for permission. He sent me an original copy of his photograph. But Gary, my apology, double apology now for knocking you off.
Y'all are gonna edit this thing and do what you need to do. But that's the contents of the foot locker, and the diary is what started Ricky on this quest to learn about his father. The diary, Ricky was not a reader, and it took him several years to get to a page and a half in that diary where his father describes what happened in Dealey Plaza, how he was behind the fence and he fired the fatal headshot that killed the president. That was among other things. Many things were in that diary. That's kind of what the diary looked like. It was one of these clasps, had a blocking clasp on it. But basically, I'm not going to read this, but you can show it up there. That he fired the shots. That there were two other men with him. His code name was Mandarin, and that appears in other places in the diary. Lebanon was on the 6th floor. That was a code name. And Saul was in the records building. Again, a code name, and we don't know who these individuals are. But he tells the story about it and how he later had to take out an officer at 10th and Patton there in Dallas, which was obviously J.D. Tippit. The reason for him taking him out, which means he killed him, is unknown exactly. My suspicion is that Tippit, who knew Roscoe and Jack Ruby, by the way, he thought something was amiss, and Roscoe had to kill him. That's the story. But Ricky and Tricia, his wife, read that page and a half over and over, and it was melted into their mind, so to speak. And so they recreated this for us, and it's in the book that tells the story. So
I'm sure that our viewers or listeners understand this. Roscoe White, ex-Marine in Asia for a time, comes back, ultimately ends up on the Dallas Police Department force. And I think you're saying that he's admitting that he shot from the grassy knoll and then was able to get himself over to the corner of 10th and Patton Streets
that's right.
within approximately, I guess, 45 minutes or so. And also shot J.D. Tippit when Tippit pulled over to confront somebody who was walking on the street.
Well, that's a mystery also. That whole thing is we don't understand it, and nobody was there to understand exactly what happened. The identification of the killer. Some said there were two men there. There's witnesses. It says another police vehicle was in the area. It's the gun, cartridges, the bullets found in his body, in Tippit's body, and all that is so. What would you say, Brian? So
Mishandled.
And
Convoluted, yeah.
good, and some of it had to have been manipulated and so forth. That's an unsolved murder, except here's a man who said he did it in his own handwriting.
In his diary, yeah.
Yeah.
Is this a good time to bring up other theories about who fired the fatal shot? We can go back to 1988, Nigel Turner's series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, in which he identifies Corsican mobsters. I think he even names one, a fellow by the name of Lucien Sarti, as being among the shooters, and also Jim Files, the James Files story. How do those stories mesh with this one, if you will, Gary and Brian?
Well, I'm intimately familiar with both of them. And Nigel Turner became a friend of mine. And that whole thing is based on the sortie part is based on a written description given by a man by the name of Christian David.
David, yeah.
And so you can take the word of a criminal because I found him in jail over in Georgia. He was in jail in this country, and I told Steve Ravel, who really did the work for Nigel Turner, if you could get to him, he could tell you some things because he was connected to some of the people in the assassination apparatus going on at that time. I don't believe either of those files are Christian David's story about sortie. This makes more sense, and there's evidence that points to Roscoe White having done it, and we'll get into that in a minute. We could spend days on sortie and files, but that's a story.
Not our purpose right here.
That's not our purpose here. That's right.
Brian, what you were saying?
Oh, when you mentioned James Files, I had a long conversation with a guy yesterday about James Files, and he's trying to convince me that the guy was telling the truth. I don't know. I've never met the man, but I can tell you I don't believe his story. Let's leave it at that. It's too wild of a stretch to go from being a gopher for a mobster to all of a sudden, hey, we got one guy short. Can you help us kill the president? Okay, sure. I don't buy that at all. So, the guy's sat in prison for a long time. He probably had access to a lot of books, and he probably read up on them and learned as much as he could about it and integrated himself into the story. I simply don't believe his story, but I had to get the book just to say that I have read it. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, let's not speculate on that anymore, either, the David story or the James Files story. Let's get back to this story. Where should we pick up, Gary?
Well, as I said, Ricky, once he had found this diary and began to look into his dad's story and so forth, and the materials that he had found, one of the things in the diary was that, and Ricky actually remembered him burying something in a metal container. They had a cabin at Lake Whitney, which is probably 75 miles south and west of Dallas, big lake, and a nice cabin, and that his dad had buried something down there. He remembered that. And he also remembered, and let me throw this in right quick, on the day of the assassination, Ricky was 3 years old, basically, at the time of the assassination. And on Sunday morning, when Ruby killed Oswald, he was having a birthday party. And his dad came running in and said, "Y'all pack up. We're leaving here." And they disappeared for a few days. Anyway, that's kind of a side story. But Ricky came in. One of the things that he was interested in was this metal container. And I'm not going to go into great detail. The book does, about finding a metal canister that had things sealed away in it. It was a waterproof container, and he found it in the attic of his grandfather's house. And in that were materials. That's a picture of the container, and Ricky holding the container. Ricky, just a good old country boy, has been in business for himself for years and years and years, and has a great family, and just a guy that doesn't know how to lie. He never learned that.
Let me ask this again before you go on.
Go ahead.
Some people have been hesitant about coming forward for fear, literally, of their lives. Is he feeling threatened? Has he had?
Oh yeah, they
Oh,
they were threatened. Right after we started the book, he had a phone call and said, "Don't you recall what we told you originally? That your children might be in danger and that sort of thing." And they were crying when they called me and told me this. So, yes, there was some apprehension and fear in telling this story, but he wanted to get it out because he thought it was important to this nation to know what really happened, and this may be a key to it, may hold a key to it.
it's interesting that when I do presentations on the Kennedy assassination and tell people that even today, some people feel threatened about coming forward with their stories, which is part of the reason we don't know the whole story. They're incredulous.
Mhm.
They can't believe that people today would be under a threat to come
Right.
forward with the truth.
Well, it just shows you that we're hitting a nerve somewhere. We're making somebody uncomfortable, which is good because the more exposure this story gets, the more exposed they become.
And Gary, you use the pronoun they a number of times in your description. Does he know who called him? Do the
No,
phone records indicate where the
No.
phone call came from? Has
no,
he or you sought to find out who
no
called
way
him?
we could find out. You know,
I'm
no way
sorry?
no way we could find out. You know,
It came up on his wife's phone, and it came up with the caller ID of a friend of theirs who they speak with almost every day. So that's why they readily answered the phone. And then this unknown male voice said, you apparently didn't take our word that we can take your first child if we had to, and then hung up. So it came up as a phone number that they had known. Otherwise, I would have access. We would have been able to find out where that call came from. But that's how they hacked into that phone system.
Or that would be quite a cool, wouldn't it, to be able to
Yeah.
find out who?
okay, he also in the diary, Ricky learned about a safe deposit box his dad talked about, and he had left a bank uh, bag. That's a picture of it there, and keys to a safe deposit box at this particular bank there in Oak Cliff portion of Dallas, and he was trying to locate that box and get into it. His father was dead, and so they did. They went down there and they had the key, so they were allowed to open the box. But the banker told her, we can't let you have the contents until you probate your father's will. And so in that box were about, we've heard different amounts, but $250,000. And he had a receipt for that that's now disappeared. But anyway, they were bearer bonds of $200,000 to $250,000.
Wow.
And so after that, Ricky went to the assistant district attorney there in Midland where he lived. This is Al Shorey, and told him the story. And Mr. Shorey got nervous and called in the FBI. So before the FBI has ever even talked to Ricky White, they start surveilling him. Mm. And these are surveillance reports that I got from through Freedom of Information that tells every day that they watched he and his wife for several days before they finally approached him. And when they approached him on they had a babysitter there. They had Ricky and Tricia had two girls, and she had to call and say the FBI is here. They want you to come home right now. And so there in the front yard, they confronted Ricky and threatened him with, he showed him a book, had him read it out loud. That there'd be a $200,000 fine and jail time for anyone who withheld evidence from the federal authorities. Scared that poor boy to death, of course, and they had him pack up all the contents, including the diary, in a box and take it to the federal building there in Midland, Texas, and where they interrogated him for several hours, browbeat him. I mean, he came home beaten down, to say the least. Went in and he put the box on his pool table in the rec room and went and laid down on the bed and cried. Started crying. He was so upset. One of the FBI agents then shows up, knocks on the door, tells his wife that he evidently left his notebook, his notepad in Ricky's materials. And so she went to tell Ricky that. And when he came back, he was going out the door, said, found what I was looking for. And several days later, they noticed the diary was now missing, that they had actually they'd made some copies of it down at the FBI office and made impressions, wax impressions or clay impressions of the safe deposit key, and really beat the old boy down. And so the diary disappeared. We've never seen it since. They denied that they filched it, but it's obvious to me. Anybody that'll destroy the evidence like they have in this case, including a handwritten note from Lee Harvey Oswald to the FBI.
That the James Hosty note?
Yeah, and other things like that. The paper bag that allegedly the rifle was in, and it was destroyed during testing. How do you do these kind of things? Well, it's real easy if there's a problem to your evidence. So that's kind of the story, and gets us to the point that and it's a long story. I'm not going to go into detail where he finds the canister finally. To put it briefly, he dug up the entire backyard, or I'm talking to me and the investigator, and dug up the entire backyard of the cabin, which they didn't own at that time. Roscoe had sold it prior to his death in 1971. So anyway, Ricky learned from his mother that it might be in his grandfather's. And so Ricky went from Lake Whitney to there and found this canister up in the back corner of an attic. And he had to get a crowbar, and his wife and really worked to get it open. But the contents of it were amazing. And one of the things that's in there is his dog tag, Roscoe's dog tag, Marine Corps. And then these two pictures, they're laminated in plastic. And this identifies who the canister belonged to and what it's about. The picture of the Warren report being given to President
Johnson. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a picture of Jack Ruby in handcuffs at the courthouse. So there's no doubt about the ownership of the canister, and therefore what's in it is very, very telling and interesting, to say the least. It contained, have you got the three cables up there? These there were three. They're about probably 5 inches, 4.5, 5 inches wide, and about 7 inches long. They were typed orders to Roscoe and let me just read them to you. That'd probably be the simplest thing to do.
Gary, I've got that on another slide right here.
Okay. You can see the first slide. You can see it's from Navy Intelligence, and has Roscoe White's military serial number on it and some other information. This, best we could tell, this was from February of 1963, and it was to Mandarin. And it says foreign affairs assignments have been canceled. The next assignment is to eliminate a national security threat to worldwide peace. Destination will be Houston, Austin, or Dallas. Contacts are being arranged now. Orders are subject to change at any time. Reply back if not understood. And it's signed off by a C. Bowers. We don't know who that is. And OSHA is Office of Special Handling Affairs or something like that. Not the OSHA that we know about today.
An incredible document right there.
Yes, it is. And you can tell very, very old and deteriorated. The plastic had turned yellow, which is the reason we couldn't get a real good copy of it, and streaked, as you can see. In the bottom, it says RE rifle, code AAA, destroyed /own/. Now, at the time that this was had to have been buried by Roscoe or hidden by Roscoe before his death in 71, nobody had ever heard of the ZR rifle program that the CIA had for what they called executive action, assassination. And so what RE rifle is, we don't know. We're not going to find that, I guess, in CIA records, but obviously it had something to do with this whole thing. Go ahead and put the second one up.
That's a good question.
Yeah, the question here.
Sure.
I mean, was Roscoe assassinated? I mean, was he part of the?
Yes, in my opinion, and in the opinion of Ricky and his pastor, who heard him say he knew who did it, and there was an explosion where he worked.
Right.
Very strange, and he was burned over 90% of his body, but he lived about 24 hours before he died. And his pastor, in there, he confessed to taking life on both foreign and domestic soil. And he said he saw who did it, but he forgave him, whatever that meant. The fact that he confessed to assassinations was important to the pastor. So yes, I don't think it was an accident.
No. Geneva has told Gary, and then she was subsequently interviewed on audio tape by 2 or 3 other people. She said that Roscoe wanted out, whatever out meant. He wanted out of this business, and he basically told her, "I just signed my own death warrant." So he went from an asset to a liability, and they had to cover, they had to get rid of that liability. And so I believe that Roscoe was murdered because they were afraid he was going to tell.
And not only that, it's important. He had a conversion experience. He had turned his life around from all the stuff he had been doing, from the standpoint of being a big Jack Ruby pal at one time and making all those clubs, and he had cheated on his wife, and all of these things. But this pastor had an impact on him, and he was amazed one time they were having a building fund drive, and Roscoe was going to give $10,000 to it. Now, where does a lowly employee like Roscoe White, get $10,000? That's a good question. And anyway, that's kind of the scenario in which he died, and that's a long story too, but it's in the book.
And before we go to the next slide, I just want to point out, look at the date, was February of 63. whoever sent this, or whoever was behind this involved, whoever was involved in this plot to kill Kennedy, they knew in February '63 that he was going to be going to Austin, Houston, or Dallas, and they were going to eliminate him. Back in February, they knew that. At least that's what I read off of this document here.
Makes
So-
sense. Makes perfect sense. How could you
Mhm.
write this document if you didn't know?
Yeah. Go ahead, Gary. There's the second one.
Okay, the second document has the same heading and so forth. And it says Dallas destination chosen. Your place hidden within the department. Contacts are within this letter. Continue on as planned. And the bottom portion is the same as the other. A former CIA, in fact, he was chief of station over in Angola at one time, said he had received messages like this. This was not unusual. I had a second CIA man come and look at this, and the first thing he noticed was it says contacts are within this letter. He said, that's important. Contacts are within this letter. What does that mean? Does that mean that there's some kind of coded message within that letter? Or was there another message that was attached to this letter? Or could it be microdots? You know, Oswald was working, in fact, the notes in his little book spoke of microdots. And he was working at one time for a company that dealt in that kind of thing. So that's the second message. Go ahead to the third one now.
Okay.
By the way, that's in September of '63.
Yeah.
That's when he goes and to work for the Dallas Police Department, and goes in as an apprentice, I guess you'd call him. He's learning.
This is the third one. Go ahead, Gary.
Okay. Basically, the headings are all the same except remarks Mandarin. It's code C instead of code A. But it says stay within the department. Witnesses have eyes, ears, and mouths. You know what to do of the mix-up. The men will be in to cover all misleading evidence soon. Stay as planned. Wait for further orders.
Love this.
You can read into that a lot of things, but one of the things that pops out at you is that there's been a mix-up, and I think that was the killing of Tippit, but maybe other things also that apply here. But the men are going to come in to, take care of any of the evidence that points to anything but a lone assassin. And they did try to do that. They just failed at it, failed miserably, in my opinion. Anyway, he was to stay within the department, and one of the things that also in the canister was this little book right here. It's a shorthand book, teaching book. It dates back probably into the early 1900s, 1920, 1930, somewhere along in there. And it's only partially there. But Roscoe had taken this old shorthand book and turned it upside down and started from the back cover instead of the front cover, and pasted pictures and made notations all the way through it. And one of the main things that it points out, not only is his signature in there and his military serial number is in there, but in the back cover, which is here, it says 28 people died from witness program. Out the rest of the people later. And then underneath that is his full signature, Roscoe Anthony White. And the material in this thing is fascinating. And I don't know how much time you want to spend on it, but it's we know it's from Roscoe and put together by Roscoe. And one of the first pages in it is this headline, the moment the world stood still, and it's got written in pencil on 11/22/1963. So we know it's about the assassination. And down at the, is that on this page down at the bottom? It says even now from Bay of Pigs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it has DI or DL. I think it's probably DL and NO. That would mean Dallas and New Orleans. February 14, 2463. These are numbers that are all the way through the entire book. It perhaps is some kind of code that's way above our pay grade. And so we printed every page in the book so that people who might have some knowledge of codes might be able to tell something about that. Go ahead. This is the next picture is on this page, and it's, of course, is Jack and Robert Kennedy. And down at the bottom, he scribbled in, now got the head, going tail later. Mm-hmm. At that time, the saying of Carlos Marcello was that if you cut off the tail, the head will still bite you, you know. So they went for the head, then that takes care of the tail. And so that was significant, we thought. Here's one that really kind of blows you away, and we're still working on this. The two guys at the bottom are Warren Commission staff, and below that it says cover up starts now. But the top picture is what I thought of as a masculine looking lady. And I thought I had found her, and I wrote in the book about who I thought it was. There was a female impersonator that looks just like that. And she was in and out of, or he was in and out of New Orleans at the club My Oh My. And his stage names, he was introduced as the fabulous Mr. Harvey Lee. Now, you can't make this kind of stuff up, but that's the truth. But not long after the book was published, I found out that was not Mr. Harvey Lee. It was Doris Duke. Most people these days don't know who Doris Duke is, but you can see the second photograph from the left is where that photograph came from. That's a 1941 press photograph of Miss Doris Duke. She was she was called the richest girl in the world. Her dad owned the R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company and other things. Wow. Reynolds Aluminum he was involved in. But now, why would Roscoe White put a picture like this in there? And I began to investigate her and find out that she was married to Porfirio Rubirosa, who was a Dominican man who at one time was a son-in-law of Rafael Trujillo down in the Dominican Republic, and that they were married for about a year. And then he died in a one-car, allegedly, accident, died on the way to the hospital in the ambulance in 1965. So is he one of the strange deaths? He was also an alleged assassin, and one of his associates he was meeting with in June of 1963 was Sam Giancana. They were meeting in Rome or Paris. I don't remember now off the top of my head, but
we probably should say, Gary, for those that aren't overly familiar with the Kennedy assassination case, Marcello is the crime boss in New Orleans, Sam Giancana in Chicago. And at one time, an employee of his, if you will, was Jack Rubenstein, who drops the N Stein when he gets to Dallas.
That's right. So that's, and we could go on and on with this book. There's things in it we don't know, but we print each page, Here's one where Ruby is shooting Oswald, and Roscoe writes, set up job, Ruby was brave. That doesn't sound like somebody that doesn't know Ruby, doesn't it?
No. This is incredible, Gary,
This,
and Brian.
this,
This amazing material
Yep.
that you
well,
have here.
it is.
Overwhelming, really.
Well, he confesses basically, not only in the diary that disappeared, but here's a photograph, and he scribbles on this page 7.65 Mauser, our gun used to kill President Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963. That's a confession. And he does it again in this book where he says, you know, we did it. Here's probably as important a little picture as you'll find in this. Here he says Mandarin kills K. Of course, we know from the diary that Mandarin was his code name, and from the cables. Kills K, uses 7.65 Mauser in assassination. But this is a newspaper print of the famous Mary Mormon photograph. And if we could, and we can't, but up in the upper left-hand corner there, he puts a dot and an X. This is where he was standing. He's saying, you know, when he fired at the president, and that fits in with Ed Hoffman's story and the Bowers story.
Lee Bowers being the man in the building in the switchyard,
Right.
in the back of the parking lot here, with full view of this from behind. Yeah.
And it's obviously goes along with the head movement of the president when he's hit in the head, who went backwards and to his left, which is proper from a bullet being fired from that position.
Bill, we also have corroboration from an unusual source, but I'm glad we have it. If Roscoe's telling us he's positioned behind the fence the morning of the assassination, Geneva tells us that Roscoe left the house wearing civilian clothes, but carried his uniform on a hanger and put it in his car and drove away. Well, after the moments after the assassination, Bobby Hargis, one of the outriders of the Dallas police motorcycle officer who was riding to the left side of the president's car and was covered with all the blood and brain matter and all the spray from that shot that hit him in the head, stopped his motorcycle, let the motorcade proceed on. He parked his bike on the south side of Elm, ran across Elm, up the steps that you see here in this Mormon photograph, and said he encountered Roscoe White. And he said, Roscoe said the same thing. He said, Roscoe told him that he was looking for the shooter just as everybody else was. And so apparently that satisfied Bobby Hargis. Bobby Hargis returned to his motorcycle. And in the Botham photograph that was taken as the motorcade still comes, the rest of the motorcade passes through Elm Street, you see Hargis getting back on his bike and driving off. So we have Bobby Hargis saying without any mistake that he encountered Roscoe White on the grassy knoll. Beverly Oliver said that she saw Roscoe White without a hat and a gun belt walking down along the side of the side, you know, near the steps, walking down from behind the picket fence. So we have two people that said Roscoe White was behind the fence. Now we have Roscoe himself saying he was behind the fence. So I don't know how you could have any more cooperation from three independent people than that. But that's an important part, that Roscoe places himself on that behind the picket fence. Bobby Hargis sees him and Beverly Oliver sees him.
Brian, if I may ask, I know Beverly, how long ago did Beverly say this? Do you know? Just for my own personal curiosity.
She told that to Gary.
Yeah, right when the story came out.
When
now, she didn't identify him as Roscoe. She identified him as Geneva's husband. She didn't know his name, but Geneva, you know, Beverly worked next door at the Colony Club, and these girls, you know, went back and forth. With each other.
I was going to say, when you were talking about that earlier, that she may have known Beverly Oliver because Beverly Oliver, on break from the Colony Club, would sometimes go over to Jack Ruby's Carousel Club, where she says, among other things, that she had met Jack Ruby, she had met Lee Oswald, my friend Lee, to quote Beverly. So, boy, this is overwhelming, fellas. And how long's the book been out?
Since March.
I guess, not January, didn't it?
Yeah,
Came out in January
first 3
last
months. Yeah.
spring. Yeah.
Is it getting
So
traction? Is your story getting traction? Are people seeing this? They're going to see this.
well, we didn't have a major publisher, so there's no PR work being done. The only PR work is with guys like yourself.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Did you try a major publisher? I mean, Gary, you've published before. How many books are you affiliated with now?
well, the first book that I did was back in 1976, and about 12 publishers turned it down, and I printed it myself. And so that came out in 76. I was very successful in not selling it, and it's become a collector's item now.
Yeah.
Uh,
What do
and
publishers say to you? Do you think they're under some threat? What do
well,
they say?
you know, back in 76, you know, they weren't doing a whole lot of this. And in fact, the Zapruder film had just been shown the year before I published on national television. You know, they had really kept the lid on this.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be a good time, but it wasn't. They were still not too interested in, and it was I didn't pull any punches in the book. You know, I titled it "The Government Cover Up: The Governmental Conspiracy to Conceal the Facts About the Public Execution of John Kennedy." That's a long subtitle, but it's the truth. It was a public execution, and every president that's succeeded to that office succeeded in going to that office. I have heard those shots.
It's available on Amazon, and it's also available directly through Pinnell Publishing Unlimited.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
What's your preference?
We don't know who was behind the assassination. All we can do is, you know, I don't think you can guess, and you can put all the information together. But the main thing is that this government is hidden that are making the decisions to do this. It's not the people we've elected and sent up there. We can send the best old honest guy up there, and they'll have him converted to their way of doing things within weeks. And unfortunately, the hidden government who pulls all the strings are the same. They're the descendants of the people who took John Kennedy out.
The Roscoe White story for the federal government didn't do the right thing, and so we're having to catch up to them, basically.
We're very careful. I mean, we pointed out in the book, you know, we're not accusing the CIA or the FBI blanket of having done this, but we call the liars liars, and the people who have lied about this case, we don't pull any punches with that. They're bad players.
Well, you've certainly caught me with some.
Ricky just wanted the story out there because, you know, he felt pretty frustrated that nobody believed him except Gary and the guys over at the Assassination Information Center. So he was thrilled to put his name on this because it is his story about his father and his, you know, the trouble he went through, and so he was thankful that we did it this way rather than try to, you know, twist it all around and make it look like his dad was a bad guy. His dad wasn't a bad guy. He just did some things he did regret. You know, he told Ricky, he said, there's some things you do in life that you regret. And he felt bad about it. And that's why he changed his life, became a Christian and said, hey, I want out of this. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. I'd been doing for you. In fact, prior to this time, I had filed maybe after this time, not prior to this time, I guess. I had filed with Bud Fensterwald in Washington about 30 or 40 lawsuits against the FBI, the CIA, all of these people that were withholding information. And so I was used to doing this. And so it was easy for us to go after this. And they had to turn loose of it. And the first pages we got were highly redacted. We got a lot of black pages, not blank pages, black pages. That's where they take a black marker and mark a lot of things out. But yeah, we got this, and it certainly pointed a strong finger of accessory against certain people in the FBI.
I tried to, or I did succeed in getting information from the Texas Department of Motor Vehicles. There's a photograph that Ricky allowed us to print in the book, a picture of his father's car, a 1962 white Ford Galaxy four-door with the license plate clearly visible. And so, just to verify that that was Roscoe's car, Ricky said Roscoe and his mom both had their own cars, and Roscoe had the Ford Galaxy. And so I sent a request to the Department of Motor Vehicles for that specific number. I had Ricky sign off on it, showing that he was the heir of the family. And they wrote back and said, that record is not available to the general public. Well, it's public information. License plates are public information. And so I immediately called the customer service manager and asked, why was my request denied? And she said, well, it's not we denied it, it's just that we can't find it. And apparently back in the 60s, the city of Dallas, before the age of computers, put registrations and names of owners of vehicles on 3x5 cards. And apparently that one card in that mess of cards was lost, that Roscoe's vehicle registration was lost. So typical bureaucratic, can't find anything, or it's blacked out. That's, we were expecting that too. So
Overwhelming information.
yeah.
Thank you both. Incredible.
Thank you.
Incredible story. Brian, thank you. And Gary, good
Reggie,
luck.
stay well.
Yeah, good luck with the book, boy. I would imagine you would say when we're done, we've just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
We have, and hopefully this will open some doors to other information and maybe some people, and some people have already come forward with information about this. So I think there'll be more as the book hits the market, and maybe with people like you being our PR people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
That'll open some doors, and we really do appreciate you having us on.
We'll see what happens. Very much appreciated. Thank you guys both.
Hey, thanks, Bill.
Best to you.